So the last I left off, I was able to create the price axis and the time axis. We have candlesticks with the low and the high, giving us a vertical attributes of how high we want this window to be, and the scaling factor. I also was able to create a marker to display the price. So now, I'd like to actually be able to click somewhere on the screen, drag the mouse left, or drag the mouse right, and by doing so, move the chart left and right. Now there's another component, a zoom. I'd like to actually be able to zoom in and out to make these bars bigger and smaller. Now perhaps I'll use the mouse wheel for this. Let's go take a look at the code, try to figure out how to do it. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to have to override the mouse press, the mouse move, the mouse release. I'd like to use the mouse double click to turn on and off my crosshair, the wheel event, which will be used to scroll, and a resize event. So when I resize the window, make sure that all the candles stay within the window. Okay, now let's take a look at the implementation. So we'll set a drag, which is a cue point, and I'll set that to wherever the user clicks the mouse. I'll then want to make sure that my dragging variable is set to true, and this will all be on the mouse press event. On the mouse release event, I'll set dragging to false. Now when I double click, I'll turn on or off the crosshair variable depending upon whether it was on before. So it will just be a toggle. Then when I move the mouse, I take the mouse event, get the X coordinate, get the Y coordinate, set those to X and Y where the user is moving the mouse, and then check the buttons. So if the left button is down, then when I drag the mouse, it will change these coordinates. And then I update my view. Now looking at the drag event, the first thing I want to do is I want to check to make sure the chart view is valid and it's not a null pointer. If it's a null pointer, I'll return. Otherwise, then I want to check to make sure I'm dragging. If I'm dragging, I'll set the scrolling to the drag point plus the start drag minus the current point. And then I will also make sure that the X position is not less than 1. If it is, I want to make sure it's always set to 0, so it can only drag to a certain point. That point will be the beginning, so I'll never be able to drag past the beginning. The end drag will set dragging to false and return the point. Now let's go take a look and see if it works. Now let's take a look and see if it works. So if I double click, my crosshair pointer shows up. That's working. Double click, it turns off. Fantastic, the toggle is working. Now let's see what happens if I drag to the left. Oh, fantastic. And notice the marker. The marker will take on the close of the last bar. Fantastic. So everything seems to be working really well. And notice the height, the high, the low, And notice the price marker. You want to make sure that those scale accordingly. Perfect. So the high of this is 381.64 and the low is 380.49. Fantastic. And if I keep dragging, this is fantastic. Look at that. I can only drag, see that? I can only drag to the far left, the very first bar, which is at 0930. Fantastic. So it's restricted at the first bar. And then notice this is gray, so what that depicts is that I've actually scrolled to the left of where the current bar is. Now if I move all the way to the right, I'll be able to drag past the end of the bar, and notice what happens. Now this color signifies that I'm actually at the end of the chart, the most recent bar of the chart. Fantastic. So now I need to implement zoom. How am I going to do that? Let's take a look. Okay, so now I need to try to figure out the zoom. Well, if I look at each one of these bars, if I were to change the width of this bar from, say, this size to this size, and then calculate the number of bars that it would take for this point to this point, this distance, and I know the width of this bar, well then I'd be able to actually calculate a zoom level. So first, get the width between these 2 points, increase or decrease this bar width. And by doing that, when I update, I'll be able to actually zoom in and out by making these bars larger and smaller. Now, one of the things, when this bar gets large, it's going to be colored in. So it will receive a color, but it'll have an outline. But what happens when that bar becomes small? So if the bar becomes very small, and this, let's say that has a wick, when this bar becomes small, there's going to be a lot of different artifacts in here where it's trying to draw something like this, trying to fill it in, and create a wick. So that's going to be very difficult to see. So what I'd like to do is I would actually like to do away with this candlestick and have this entire shape, when it gets small, represented by a line that has a specific color. So it could be green for up, and it could be, say, red for down. It will also save on computation when there are many, many bars on the screen, and I have to redraw a lot of things. So now let's go take a look at the code and see how it can be done. So now let's take a look at the mouse wheel event. So when the user uses the mouse wheel, scrolls up or scrolls down, I want to get the width. I'll then get the actual candle width as well as the candle space. And I'll set this end candle width variable to the candle width. I'm doing this because it's easy to debug. And then when the angle delta is greater than 0, so that means when you scroll up, it'll set the candle width to this candle width plus 1. Then I get the angle delta, and when it's less than 0, I want to check. First of all, I want to make sure that this width is less than or equal to 2. I'm going to return, because otherwise I'll have negative values and I don't want the candles to get inverted. I'll then set the candle width to this end candle width variable, -1. Now once that is all done, I'll then want to get the total candle length from the chart model. I'll need to convert the candle size into pixels by taking the width and dividing it by the total candle count per window. I'll then want to get the total distance from taking the candle data length -1, because I want 1 from the end, subtract it from the candle count, and then multiply it by the candle size in pixels. Once I have that total distance, I can then set my variable for my scrolling variable, which is the point, and I can set the x position to the candle distance, or total distance, plus the candle size in pixels. Once that's done, I go ahead and update the view. Now let's take a look at the actual chart, and let's see if it works. Great. So here's my chart. I can zoom in. Now watch what happens when I begin to zoom out. Watch this bar. When I get to a certain distance, look at that. Perfect. It creates the candle. Watch this wick, this bar right here. Look at that. Fantastic. So now when I zoom out, it'll draw faster, because I don't necessarily need to see the wick or the body when I'm at this far distance. It's very difficult to see anyway. There'll be a lot of artifacts. So now when I zoom in, terrific. And I can still scroll left and right. If I double click, my crosshair pointer still works. Terrific. That's fantastic. That is amazing. So I can still scroll. Let's see if it still scrolls to the very beginning. Great, look at this. It'll still be restricted. And if I scroll to the far end, that's amazing. Can zoom in, still scroll. And notice my crosshair, or my marker, pointing to the closing bar. And notice how it snaps. See, it'll snap to the close. For each bar, it moves in increments of 1 bar at a time. Turn off my crosshair, so it moves 1 bar at a time. That's terrific. Absolutely amazing. So now I have zoom and panning in the chart. And it's pretty fast. That's great.